Hello and welcome to the Problem Gambling Podcast. I'm Barry Grant, an addiction counselor with Extern Problem Gambling. My co-host is Claire Donegan, who is a lived experience expert, who's also a member of the Extern Problem Gambling Project. You might have noticed if you listened to the podcast before that Tony O'Reilly is not here. Tony is off providing gambling harm prevention talks in schools all across Ireland at the moment, so he's very busy doing that. We're doing a special series this time, talking to women who have been affected in different ways by gambling related harms. And we're doing this special series as a way to promote a new service, which Claire will be running out. It's called the EmpowerHer Recovery Network. And if you want to go to the main page of our website, problemgambling.ie, you'll see the link to all the details on that on the top of the main page. So today we have a great guest, Julie Martin, who is an affected other and the coordinator with our Peer Aid in the UK. Julie, thanks a million for joining us this morning. How are you today?
I'm good, and you're very welcome. It's lovely to speak to you.
Yeah, what part of the UK are you in?
I currently live in Essex.
Okay. Is the sun shining there? Because it's
It
horrible
is.
here.
We've had some good sunshine actually the last few weeks. We've been quite lucky.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, look, as sometimes we do on the podcast, if we end up speaking about certain topics, I'll just give a trigger warning today that we may be touching on some topics that would include suicide and self-harm, and also other forms of violence. So if that is something that might be triggering for you, dear listener, we just want to give you the heads up on that in advance. So, Julie, I mean, as an affected other, I mean, some people might not recognize that term. That means that you are a family member of a person who had a gambling problem or gambling disorder or whatever name we're going to put on it. There are many names. Would you like to start out telling us a little bit about your experience there?
Well, it all started. I'd probably been married about 10 years before I first found out about my husband's gambling. I tend to believe now that he was actually gambling through our whole relationship. Um, but because I came from a family that had never gambled, obviously I wasn't aware of the signs or aware of really what went on. He was quite a hard worker. He used to work at night quite a lot. So I didn't realise that part of that time was spent in casinos in London. And it wasn't till we'd had both of our children, and they were probably about 7 and 11, I think, at this stage, that I first begun to realise that we both worked and we worked hard, yet there was no money. And things became more difficult, and he wasn't bringing in any money. And I had to start obviously asking questions because things got a bit tense around the finances because we had a home and obviously the children to look after. And in the end, he had to admit that he had been gambling for quite a long time and that he had run up significant debts on credit cards and loans, and obviously used any wages that he'd been earning. And I was just absolutely shocked. You know, he was an intelligent man. It always makes me smile to think he had a maths degree, you know, and I think, how can a person with a maths degree ruin their life and financially burden their family, you know, through something like gambling? You think he would have worked out the odds, you know. But yeah, so unfortunately, I didn't know, like everybody, you know, everyone uses the words shame and stigma, massively important around what I felt at that time. I felt stupid. I felt he was behaving stupidly and irresponsibly. And I didn't want to share that with anybody. I couldn't share it with anybody, you know, so I kept it all to myself. The financial problems, the gambling, everything, didn't tell anybody. Now, in him telling me that he was gambling, he didn't stop. His attitude was that he had it under control. He would deal with the issues. He would pay off all the debts, and I'm not to worry about anything. But unfortunately, it did escalate. Our financial situation got so bad at some points during probably that next year or two that I didn't have money to buy food sometimes. It was that bad. And unfortunately, the more he gambled, and obviously the more he lost, the more stressed he became, and the more it affected his mental health. So I'm keeping all of this to myself. I'm trying to keep this away from the children, because obviously there were plenty of arguments and things about money at that time. But he became increasingly angry and coercive over, with myself. He became quite mentally and verbally abusive to start with. I think he was deflecting his problems that he had onto me. So everything was my fault. He gambled because I was such a bad mother. He didn't do well with certain things because, I was a terrible wife. So it was always, it's your fault. It's your fault. And I suppose at that point, because I hadn't told anybody and I felt really, really lonely, really isolated, I began to believe all of it. It put me at a very, very low point, trying to, somebody that you love very much, somebody that you'd spent a lot of years with, you want to help them. You want to help them to feel better. And then I was doubting myself, I suppose, at that point, thinking, is it me? Am I not being a good wife? Am I not doing things right? And unfortunately, like I say, the gambling continued. He didn't stop. And it got to a point that he really, really was just like a completely different person. And my daughter was sleeping with me at that point, I think, because she felt the tension and was a little bit scared. And one evening he was leaving for work, and I think his card, bank card, had been swallowed up by an ATM machine, and he wanted my card, and I wouldn't give it to him. So he physically dragged me out of bed to get me to get this bank card for him, find the bank card for him. My daughter ran out the house to a neighbour and told a neighbour what was happening. And the neighbour called the police. And that led to us being separated for about 6 months because he was charged with harassment, and we had a order put on place that he couldn't come near us, speak to me or the children. And at that point, which obviously was an extremely low point, because again, seeing a person you care about and a person you love turn into somebody completely different purely because of gambling was difficult in itself. But then to be separated from him, having to tell the family, having to admit everything that was going on was absolutely awful. Trying to make the best of things for the children, so that they understood to the best that I could get them to understand at their age. It was a really, really hard and difficult time. But I did speak to the police, and I was put in touch with a shelter domestic violence helpline. And I told them all about his gambling and told them that, without the gambling, he was perfectly, great person. And I asked them if they could get him some help. And at no point at that time, and we are talking probably 15 years ago now, at no point did they get him any help. Nobody ever dealt or asked him about his gambling issues. He was put on an anger management course as part of what he had to do for probation. But again, asked for or received no help at all with his gambling problems. So we were separated for about 6 months, but I really wanted the family to get back together. I really wanted the kids to have their dad. I was sure that this whole experience would put things into perspective for him and he would stop gambling and we could move forward. Obviously, getting back together was great on one hand, but obviously there was a great strain on family relations. My parents, my family, wouldn't speak to him for probably a good 18 months, 2 years after we'd got back together. So I was having to live separate lives. So I had my home life and then I'd take the kids to see my family, but obviously he wouldn't be part of that. And that was really difficult as well because I just wanted everyone to be back to how we used to be before it all started. But thankfully, at some point during that time, I sat them down, had a conversation with them, sat him down, had a conversation with him, and managed to reunite the family, which was lovely for a couple of years. But then in about 2018, 2019, I started seeing small traits in him again, just things he was doing, started to recognize behavior. I'd already started working actually part-time in the gambling harm space at this point. It was kind of my therapy to look for or use the internet to find out as much as I could about gambling. And with that, I was lucky enough to be asked to do the All Bets Are Off podcast with Chris Gillam. And through that, I started to work with Gambling Harm UK. So I had a better understanding of a gambler than I did in the beginning when it was just like anger and frustration at the stupidity of the waste of money. I knew obviously this time it was a lot more than that. But yeah, so I began to see traits in him again, that he was using his phone quite a lot, sitting on the laptop quite a lot, disengaging from us again. But I was really scared to ask him if he was gambling again, because if he wasn't, we'd had like 3 or 4 really good years. And I didn't want to trigger him, or make him feel bad. So I didn't say anything for quite a while. And then we did have savings at this point. We'd worked really hard. We had savings. Everything was going well. And I went to just do something simple with the bank. And all of the savings had gone. Every single penny had gone. And obviously that exploded into a massive argument again about just how it had all started again, how it had all happened. And it continued like that for another 2 years. I chose to stay. I couldn't actually leave. I had no money of my own. We had no money. I wasn't going to just leave with the kids and upset their lives again. So it took us up to lockdown and he was still gambling. The house had been remortgaged without me knowing. He'd taken out loans in my name without me knowing. He'd borrowed so much money from so many different people that I didn't even know the people. And during lockdown, he just spent the whole of that time sat in one chair. He didn't change his clothes. He very rarely showered. He did 12 hours a day on a laptop, gambling from one company to the next company to the next company. So he'd do like 4 hours. They'd ask him to take a break. So he'd just go on to the next company, do another 4 hours. They'd ask him to take a break. He'd move on to the next one. And that was his life. He even used to carry the laptop to the toilet. He wouldn't stop for a second. He didn't speak to us. We lived upstairs really most of the time because it was like the atmosphere in the house was so bad. It was like walking on eggshells. It was an awful time. I used to take our dog out for a walk at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was walking to up to 10 miles out for like 2.5 hours, 3 hours, just to get some fresh air and get away from what was going on. And over this period of time, unfortunately, he just became increasingly violent, um, increasingly angry. Um, and unfortunately, he attacked me in front of our son. My son intervened, and I'd got to a point, such a low point by this time, that I realised that it couldn't go on anymore, and I had to do something. So I rung the police, and he was arrested, and he was put on probation. Sorry, well, he was put on remand, and he stayed in prison for, I think, about 3 months. Because of COVID, there weren't any courts working and things, so um, he was let out. And unfortunately, our daughter was 21 at this point, and she lived in Brighton. And because again, he wasn't allowed to talk to me or our son or come near the family home. He absolutely bombarded her morning, noon, and night with telephone calls. He used to turn up at her door. Everything that he wanted to say to me or take out on me or have me know, he did through her, which in the end ended up with her having a mental breakdown. She lost her job. She couldn't cope with the pressure of seeing her dad in that way, of dealing with everything that was going on. It obviously had a massive effect on myself and my son as well. Um, and it came to a head, unfortunately, in November of 2021, when Bill very sadly took his own life, in what has been called a gambling related suicide. Um, and that in itself was something that we've been left, apart from they say about the gambling harm legacy, we've been left with the legacy of losing somebody that was a good person, a good, kind, happy, funny, intelligent man who completely lost his mental health to the financial burden of his gambling. Um, I now, as you know, I now continue to work in the gambling harm space. I'm really active in sharing my story. As difficult as it can be sometimes, I think it's really, really important that people hear this story, so that I can try my best to prevent things happening. Because I think, prevention and awareness is so important. And now I do some really fantastic work with a charity called BetKnowMore UK. I'm part of the Peer Aid program, and we do peer support, one-to-one peer support and group support for people in recovery from gambling, and their partners or family. And you can self-refer through our website, or through the gambling helpline. Um, and unfortunately, we see more and more people coming through our referrals. We're always kept busy, which is such a shame, but there is a need for support for people, and a great need as well for people who, like myself, didn't know where to turn, had a loved one that was gambling. And I just want to stress probably as well that please don't feel isolated. Don't feel that shame that I felt. There are plenty of people out there that can talk to you and help you. And so really, the outcome of something that was actually really sad for us has brought me into a space that I feel like I'm doing some really good work now, and helping a lot of people to get through those problems, taking them to a better place, raising a lot of awareness, and with Peer Aid, doing some really good work.
Thank you for sharing that, Julie. And it is a surreal story. And one I know that you've shared quite a lot because you know the power of it. So we do appreciate that. Thank you. And it's funny because like met you on so many occasions, you're probably the most happy-go-lucky person I have met. And I would never know what, that story behind it. But like what you're doing is, you're helping people through that. And I think that a lot of the time that effect on the people around you gets lost in translation. And especially as a mother as well, I can, only try to imagine what that must have been like for you. You mentioned that you had asked for them to help your husband. So do you think he would have accepted that help at the time?
I think he'd have been more likely to have accepted that help had it have been through an authority or through somebody else. I think his own shame of his gambling addiction meant that he couldn't accept the help through me or wouldn't admit to me that he had an addiction. I mean, I don't know. At the very end, no, I think his mental health was so bad, unfortunately, that he wouldn't have accepted help from anybody. He was always quite a proud man as well, and wouldn't want to have been thought of as being weak or unwell. So, but still, I do believe that gambling harm isn't talked about enough, within the criminal justice system, within the domestic violence, charities, even within going, we're trying to push to get doctors to ask, they ask about your drinking, they ask about your smoking. Why can't they ask if you, have you encountered or do you encounter any gambling harm? It's really important that we start talking about it more, so that people have the opportunity to get help, even if they didn't know it was there.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, I suppose from the point of view of your kids are adults now, right? But at the time, do you think they understood?
I think it was very difficult for them. As I said, I always tried to talk to them about it in an age appropriate way, but it's, how do you say, your dad's not well because he spent all of our money on a game on the laptop. It's not something you can get someone to understand. I mean, I'm not, and I've said time and time again, I am not anti-gambling. And I've never said ever that I'm anti-gambling, because responsibly and done with money that can be afforded, it's part of life, it's entertainment. What I am continually fighting for is the constant coercive behavior of the industry. And I posted, actually only yesterday, I received a white envelope addressed to my husband. Now we'll be 3 years of his passing this coming November. And I opened it, and I'm always scared to open it. I haven't had a letter with his name on it for probably 18 months, 2 years now. But you never know what it'll be. And I'm always worried it's someone that's found him for money, or, And I opened the envelope, and it was from Mr. Q's casinos offering him free bets and come back, we miss you. And it was very upsetting, extremely triggering. And this is the kind of thing that needs to stop.
That's actually terrifying, to be honest. Did you contact them?
I've done a LinkedIn post. In anger, I ripped it up. But I have done a LinkedIn post, and a gentleman on there has from a financial ombudsman has said that he has contacts with Mr. Q and has sent them some information regarding what's happened, and he will let me know if they get back to him. But it's not just me, it's how triggering it could be for someone in recovery. That's only got to come on a bad day, and the whole problem could start again.
I'm 4 years into my recovery. I get messages from companies I've never even heard of. And I mean, text to my phone as well. And I've changed my number. So I don't know what they do or how they manage it, but I'm luckily I'm not in a bad place that way, but you could very easily be having that bad day when you get that text. Can I just ask, I suppose I'm always going to come at this like the gambler, you're kind of seeing it from the other side, but say from I mean, you've described how hard you had to work and how you never had money and the savings were gone. Like, how do you think that all of that financial struggle over the years has affected your relationship now with money? Because you described legacy harm, and that is something I feel very strongly about, like the legacy harm of this addiction. I mean, you weren't the one doing the gambling, and yet you're the one who had the loans in their name.
Mm.
So, like, how is that for you now? Like, how do you feel about that?
Um, I'm angry still that he was able to do that, because when I went to go and shut down our joint account, when we separated the second time, I wanted to close our joint account and they wouldn't let me without his permission. Yet they'd allowed him to remortgage the house and take out loans in my name without knowing that I'd given permission, but I couldn't shut our joint account. And I said, the man's been arrested. I'm not allowed to contact him. I'm not allowed to speak to him. In fact, he's currently on remand in prison. I need to close this account. And they wouldn't let me. So then I had to open my own account. I'd got myself a job in a dementia care home during COVID, which was not good for my mental health. But I had to earn money because I wasn't earning money and there was nothing coming in. So I had my wages put into my own account, and then I had to transfer last minute, like mortgage money over to the joint account, hoping that he wasn't going to get access to it. So my relationship with money now is money scares me. It still scares me. I'm always conscious of having enough money. I mean, I've never wasted money anyway. I've always, been the type of person to be quite responsible with money, but money scares me now. And I think things are still far too easy. And there needs to be more regulation around banks and how they work.
It's shocking, isn't it? That is absolutely shocking that that could happen without your knowledge. Barry, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories, certainly of people with gambling, people in active addiction with gambling, taking out mortgages, without their spouse or partner's knowledge. But I'd never met a person to whom it happened. So, I mean, obviously it can happen, and I imagine that the systems in the UK within the banks are at least as robust, if not more robust, in terms of, if somebody co-owns a family home and then one of those people comes along to remortgage it, generally one would need proof that the other person has signed off on that more than just, a bit of ink on paper. You might want to actually see the person in the flesh, confirm that they actually are prepared to do that. So, I mean, certainly the banks need to pull their socks up majorly there. And, so not just the mortgage, but
I mean,
also other loans as well.
this was a number of years ago now, and I think mortgage-wise, things are a lot tighter in the UK now. But I still had to pay back the loans, even after he'd taken his life, the loans that were taken out in my name. So there was £15,000 worth of loans that I still had to pay back.
So, yeah,
Be
sorry.
written off.
Yeah, so I don't understand that because, I mean, that was fraud. Even I'm assuming a person can commit fraud against their spouse. I would think that that's possible. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, because usually well, not always, but often the legacy harm that you've both spoken about is inflicted on the individual, but then there is that ripple effect where, well, it's impacting on spouses, partners, parents, children, other affected
Absolutely.
others. But quite often not as directly in your case, where literally your names were on these
Yeah.
fraudulently obtained loan documents. I mean, you mentioned something that kind of jumped out at me as well, that your husband had a maths degree, and so many of the people that I've worked with over the years were really good at maths, or really good, or they worked in statistics, or they had worked for bookmakers, or they had themselves been bookmakers, and on paper, one would think would be kind of excluded in some way from developing an addiction to gambling. But I suppose that kind of negates the strength of the emotional side, which, I'd also often say to people, like, if there's a battle between your emotional brain and your logical brain, excuse the pun, always bet on the emotional brain, because the
Yeah.
logical brain really doesn't have much of a chance
No.
in that kind of a fight for any of us, like across the board. But um, yeah, and like Claire talked about your positivity there, and I'd follow you on Twitter. You have this great kind of positive attitude. I mean, how have you gotten support yourself?
Oh,
Uh,
yes. Lots. Um, I mean, so I had a period of years under my GP. Uh, I had to take antidepressants. I had very, very low time. The first time it happened, and then obviously the second time, and then again after he took his life. I don't know how I'm still here sometimes, but I've always said right from the beginning, my children lost their father a long time before he took his own life. Um, and they're certainly never going to lose another parent. And yes, I still have days. I still have days that I get upset and I get angry and I think why. And I still have questions that will never be answered. But I choose to be happy. I choose to move forward. Um, I know that I did everything I could. It took me a long time to come to terms with that. I had to have quite an amount of therapy myself, counselling and talking to come to terms, to get rid of my own guilt. I carried guilt, for as much as I know that I did, um, everything I could to help him, everything. And I stayed and I begged and I pleaded for years. I had guilt that for a long time, that was there something else I could have done? Was there something else I could have said? You know, and it took quite a few attempts at therapy for me to get that right in my own head. But like I said, I can't. He will never be forgotten. He was in our lives a long time. I've got two beautiful children because of him that are amazing. How they have really worked hard to get their own mental health back and be happy. And I certainly am not going to let that be or overcloud the rest of our lives. It's important, that we know that recovery for everybody is an onward process, and you've got to keep moving forward.
Do you feel a little bit more protective, do you think, of your kids now?
I question them a lot. They're both obviously. My daughter's a bit of a gamer. My son likes certain stuff on his phone, and and it doesn't matter how old they are. They need, they know that I'm always going to be checking, always going to be checking. My daughter developed a bit of a shopping addiction with her mental health. She'd buy absolute rubbish. But I think it was just a way of her coping. And she's so much better now. I mean, she's got a great job. She's really living her best life right now. And but I always check. I'm always checking. And I think I am. I overcompensate sometimes because I try and be both parents. I try and be all things that I believe they've lost. But then when you step back and you look at them and I see how fabulous they are and how well they're doing, I should actually be a bit more proud of myself and know that, that I'm so happy that they are where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I can imagine, like I know I'm coming again from a different point of view. I've had the addiction, but for example, like my son, he's in this really small school, right? He's only 6, and there's only 2 other kids in his class, and they're all boys, and both these boys have PlayStations, right? And he was just telling me about this. He wasn't asking for one or anything, and I just went, you know, like, do you want one? And he was like, no, no, I've no interest. And I was so relieved to hear this because it probably is inevitable. I will have that day where he's more interested in these type of things, and I will have to deal with that then. But I am terrified when that day comes, you
Mm.
know? But in saying that, I'm also very grateful that I have that awareness that something could develop from that. So yes, probably a little overprotective, but in a good way, I hope. Like, if anything comes from the trauma of this addiction, at least it's awareness of what can go wrong. And we can focus on that a little bit too much sometimes, but I'm glad I have that awareness now rather than not have it and see it get out of control and not know what to do with it.
Absolutely. And that's the thing these days, I think, parenting is hard as it is, but it's got even harder around social media, around all the tech, around the games, around, even so far as people don't think that buying the football cards, the albums, you buy a pack of football cards, I don't know what they are now, £2.50, £3 a pack. Once you get your album and you start buying those football cards, you need to finish that album. But how many doubles do you buy? How many more packets do you have to have? And then the need gets more when you only want one or two, you've got one or two left. So you continue buying them. Now, these are children, but they're already building up that need to spend more money to finish the project, but it's unhealthy. I think it really is quite unhealthy, and we need to be aware. Excuse me. We need to be aware about these things and how, in the wrong hands and for the wrong reasons, they can actually be quite harmful.
Absolutely. And you've nailed it on the head. And to be honest, I wouldn't have even thought of that, but it's so true. Yeah. Can you tell us a bit more about the work you're doing with Bet No More? Because I think that what I love about, having known a lot of people who work for Bet No More over the years and knowing yourself, I love the idea of that lived experience element that you really, really focus on. And I know that there are several different services that Bet No More do that are based in lived experience. So can you tell us a bit more about them?
Yeah, of course. We have 3 main services. So we have Goals, which is London based or Greater London based, and that's more face to face in the community, awareness and peer support for gambling. We have New Beginnings, which is our women to women service. So it's all of our lived experience ladies. I know you've met Lisa Walker many times. She and a lovely team of people run a service of group support where they follow a program, 10-week program. And then they also have an aftercare group, and that'll all be ladies in recovery or affected others. And then we have the Peer Aid program, which is all lived experience. So all of our coordinators have lived experience, but then we train volunteers who have been through the program. So they've been through our peer support. They may or may not have had clinical therapy. They could have had it at the same time. But we have a peer aid training program. So we're currently on our 12th cohort. And we do a 8-week training program, and they will then be able to volunteer and do one-to-one support with their lived experience and their training knowledge to people who come through as referrals who need help with their gambling harms. And that again is for gamblers and affected others. So I mean, as you know, Bet No More was started by Frankie Graham 10 years ago. It's our 10th anniversary. And he did it purely through his own lived experience. And he's continued that kind of family lived experience feel within the charity. And although we have got extensively bigger, it still feels the same, as we all have like the same sort of goals and the same sort of feelings and the same sort of want to help people. So it is a great job, a job that, like I said, I wish I didn't have to have, but the fact that I do, it's great to be able to offer that help and talk to people in a way that it's pure honesty, empathy, honesty, authenticity. I just tell it as it is, and I think people appreciate that, because they hear words and they hear things that they know they've felt, and it makes them feel safe, and that's a really good service to be able to give people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can hear it in your voice how much you actually love your job as well. There's a connection there with all your colleagues, isn't there? And an inspiration that each of them has, that they encourage you to tell their stories and to help people the same way you do. From what I understand, it's quite a busy service. So you were saying that at the start as well, like, are you noticing a big kind of increase in people coming through?
I think that a significant change, obviously now we have New Beginnings and it is a women's program. I think we had a significant change after lockdown, that women, a lot more women have started to come through the program. We just have a constant steady stream, so it goes to prove that we need to keep working hard. We need to keep extending the service. We need to show, bring more awareness. I'd love, as you said, Tony's not here because he's out in schools. That's the best place to start. You've got to start 14 years old, 12, 14 years old. You've got to start bringing that awareness into schools in programs that make, kids understand that the amount of times that I've done schools programs with my last job, and 16-year-olds are already online betting, and if they're doing it at 16, what they're going to be like by the time they're 20. So the awareness is important.
Thanks, Julie. And just before we finish up, I'm going to need to get to a counselling session shortly. But what advice would you give to anyone, whether it's an affected other who's harmed by a loved one's gambling, or a person in addiction or trying to get into recovery from their own gambling? And what would be the top advice you'd give to them?
It's got to be get the help. Don't believe that on your own you can solve that problem, because you're just kidding yourself. You're hiding it. If you feel isolated, if you feel alone, if you feel, shame for whatever reason, there are plenty of places to go to get help, and get that help and talk it through, and realize that you're not on your own. You definitely don't need to feel that way.
Yeah, it's amazing. Everybody gives that same answer. Pretty much. Yeah. But it's true, though. It's
true, because it's probably the first thing that I hear so many clients say is, I didn't know there were other people that were like this. I didn't know there were other people that felt like this. So it's just making sure people know that we are out there and we are there to help.
And even the accountability piece, like once you start talking to another person, it could be a friend or a family member, it could be a therapist or somebody on a helpline, or peer support, whatever it might be. Then it's out there. It's not just you versus the little voice in your head, because we can all convince ourselves that pretty much anything is a good idea when it's just in our head. But try convincing your spouse that it's a good idea is a different story, or your partner, or your family, or your parent, or whatever. So even a friend, once you hear the words coming out of your mouth, it sounds very, very different. Any last thoughts or questions, Claire?
No, I mean, I'm so grateful to have Julie here and to tell her story. And, it's not an easy one to tell, but she is doing like you're doing powerful work
Yeah.
in what you're doing. And yes, as I say, she's like happy-go-lucky Julie. So it's really nice to have her here, and you're very inspirational, and definitely make me smile when I see you active on LinkedIn or Twitter, wherever it is, because you're motivational in what you do. So thank you for that, Julie. I really
Oh, very
appreciate it,
welcome.
and I wish you all the best with your role, which I know you've been in a while now, and I know you're doing great work in.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And I second everything Claire says because, yeah, you bring so much positivity into the social network space, which unfortunately there's a lot of
Can be.
negativity,
Yeah, quite negative
a
at
lot of
times.
negativity in there. So, and anybody who's listening in the UK, again, there is the whole suite of services from Bet No More that Julie just described there. If you're seeking help because of your own gambling or because of a loved one's gambling, is it betnomore.org.uk.co.uk?
Yeah.
.org.uk.
I think it's betKnowMoreUK.org.
Hey, yeah,
Ah, okay. UK.org. But even if you Google Bet No More,
you'll get
KNOW, you'll
we're
find
there.
Bet No. Julie Martin,
National Gambling Helpline as well.
yeah, yeah, brilliant. So thanks a million, Julie Martin, affected other and coordinator with Bet No More Peer Aid. And look, keep doing all the great work that you're doing and keep on bringing all that happiness and positivity into the world. Thanks so much for giving up your time today. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.